I'm really happy to introduce Barry Taff to you tonight. And so I don't miss anything, I'm going to read this brief biography on him. He earned his doctorate degree in psychophysiology, and he had a minor in biomedical engineering. He holds 6 medical patents and 1 in aerospace, and he's done 26 years of investigations in the parapsychology. The movie, The Entity with Barbara Hershey, is based on his experiences, and he's been on many TV and radio shows discussing the UFO phenomenon. And right now he has a film project in development with Columbia Pictures. Tonight he's going to be talking to us about UFO propulsion. Let's give a big welcome to Dr. Barry Taff.
Okay, we're all here. Well, actually, I'm here to talk to you about getting your pilot's license tonight, if any of you are interested. No, seriously. How many of you people semi-regularly travel across the country by plane? Okay. How many of you go to Europe, have been to Europe or, let's say, Asia? Do you like spending 5 to 8 hours on a plane? Do you enjoy sweating in that really humid, fuselage and eating that lousy food and seeing movies you've already seen or don't want to see? Well, how would you like it? What would you think if I told you that we have the technology today to get us from LA to New York in well under an hour, in under half an hour, including acceleration, deceleration, takeoff, and landing? Would you like that better than 5 hours or 8 or 11? And what would you feel if the technology was being withheld from us because it wasn't commercially viable yet? Being that the manufacturers of engines such as Pratt & Whitney and General Electric and Rolls-Royce, Morton Thiokol, and the fuel companies who supply JP4, JP5, JP7 jet fuel don't want to give that up.
Why don't they just go to the new technology?
Because it's still financially efficacious to make jets and jet fuel. Now, what's important to realize before we get into what UFOs are and may be, is that we've been flying the same way for 90 years. Since the Wright brothers and Kitty Hawk to the space shuttle, we're flying the same way, where we went from propellers to different forms of jets to rockets, but we're still flying the same way. Everything that flies in our atmosphere that we build, meaning humans, you build, flies aerodynamically. Real simply, there are what's called dynamic control surfaces on the aircraft, and by maneuvering these dynamic control surfaces, you can make air move in different ways around the aircraft, and that will produce lift, thrust, pitch, yaw, and roll. Real simple. But from going from a few miles per hour to many thousands of miles per hour, we're still flying the same way. And the only reason we're not flying in supersonic transports today is because there was a big problem with the ecology back in the 70s, which there still is. And the second problem was that the money was not there. To build supersonic transports today would probably cost about $100 to $200 billion. And your ticket cost would go up, or price would increase 300 to 400% overnight. So it's not cost efficient yet. But before I get into UFOs, I have to explain again what different types of propulsion systems are. Now I'm going to be quoting an article I published in UFO magazine in Volume 5, Number 6, 1990. It's got the old A-12 attack aircraft that was never built because of scandal on the cover. Another boondoggle. We have a number of different jet engines that have been propelling us. Let's forget propellers because they're totally inefficient. We went from a fan jet, which propels commercial jet airliners, to a turbojet, which powers most military aircraft. And then from there we have a ramjet, which is even faster. And then we have a turbo ramjet. And then from there we go to a scramjet. And from a scramjet we go to a rocket. And from a rocket we evolve to what's called field propulsion. And for field propulsion we get into what you call the, quote, exotic technologies like warp drive and temporal displacement. But let me explain the difference. All the jet fighters we have now are turbojets. The fastest acknowledged aircraft on Earth is the SR-71. And if you ever follow the news, the formal announcement of the Air Force, or from Lockheed Skunk Works, was that the aircraft's official top speed is 2,193 miles per hour. Don't believe it. It's a total lie. I know this because I knew several SR-71 pilots. Put it this way, it frequently flew hypersonic, which is in excess of Mach 5, which is well over 4,000 miles per hour. And that technology was first flown in 1962, so it's 31-year-old technology. It's obsolete. That engine, they're called J58 Pratt & Whitney engines. They're dual-cycle bypass engines powered by JP7 fuel. At the speed in excess of 2,000 miles per hour, any dynamic control surface on an aircraft will be ripped off by the air. So there are no ailerons, there are no vertifans, there's no rudder, so to speak. You know how the SR-71 is maneuvered? They move fuel from one tank to another, which causes pitch, yaw, and roll. Otherwise, the aircraft would disintegrate. The material the SR-71 is made out of is a annealed titanium structure covered with a special, what they call iron ball composite material that absorbs and ablates radar. To give you an idea of how fast it is, when it flew over North Korea, North Vietnam, and other very sensitive regions, they were frequently fired upon by enemy aircraft and ground installations, SA-2s, SA-6s, SA-9s. They could outrun any anti-aircraft missile in the world. They could also project a radar image of the aircraft up to 5 miles away from its point of origin. Not a visual image, a radar image. Now this technology dates from 1962, remember that. It's 31 years old. And that's the turbo ramjet. And the fuel is so non-volatile that you have to ignite it with a chemical reaction. If you put a match to JP7 fuel, it will not ignite. It's like water, nothing will happen. Well, you know they retired the SR-71 a couple years ago. Everyone was really upset, except the Air Force, because they had something to replace it. And the replacement has two code names. One is Aurora, which you're all familiar with. Another name is Senior Citizen, because it's old now. Let me give you this is Aviation Leak or Week. And this is the edition that covers this is October 1st, 1990. And the title is Secret Advanced Vehicles Demonstrate Technologies for Future Military Use. Here is one of the artist versions of Aurora. I'll show you the one that's more accurate. The one that's more accurate is this one. Now to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, it's a smooth-edged triangular-shaped vehicle. There's no vertical stabilizers, there's no canards. It's made out of a metal matrix composite of titanium, aluminum, and carbon. And it can sustain endoatmospheric speeds in excess of Mach 12. Now, the speed of sound, Mach 1, at sea level is 741.1 miles per hour. Times that by 12 and see what you come up with. Oh, a little under 12,000 miles per hour. Its ceiling is over 240,000 feet. The SR-71 ceiling was 140,000 feet, so it's a little over 100,000 feet in excess of that. It's powered by liquid, well, it's a dual-cycle engine. Again, turbo ramjets, which the SR-71 had. Then it cycles over to a liquid methane-powered scramjets. To give you an idea of how powerful those engines are, when it flies out of Nellis, they went on the apron and they're taxiing for takeoff and they run the engines up to speed. The vibrations were shaking buildings 16 miles away. It's one aircraft with 2 scramjets. Do you think we could have that at the airport? It's a little bit of a problem. Also, these scramjets are not conventional in the sense that it's not a continuous wave propulsion. They don't just pump out garbage out the back. It's a pulsed wave detonation engine. And the description of the exhaust note, or the signature, is instead of a continuous screech, it's a low-frequency 1 to 5 hertz pulsing sound that sounds as if the air is being ripped apart. And this is heard for up to 16 miles away at full afterburner takeoff. So it's not something you want to be close to, when it's taking off. Reports on the vehicle came in from the North Sea and oil rigs where people were seeing these things flying. And they were dark, they had no running lights, and they had no particular signature on the aircraft. And again, imagine traveling at Mach 8, which is an average cruise speed for the Aurora. That's over 6,000 miles per hour, easily. It's cruising, it's just sort of loafing along. To give you an idea of the accelerations involved, this is manned by a crew of 3. The fastest anti-ballistic missile built by people was called the Sprint and the Spartan ABM. They've been abolished because they were too good. They accelerate from rest to 17,000 miles per hour in less than 5 seconds. That's over 67 to 90 Gs. And they couldn't catch the aurora at open throttle with scramjets. That's the kind of acceleration we're talking about. The vehicle is cooled with a cryogenic substance that also cools the engines. So you're talking they could insulate the crew. Now, again, let me make it clear. We're talking about the same primitive technology. Let me see real crude. Make a real simple drawing here. Everything that flies, propeller, jet, rocket, flies by symmetric reaction propulsion. You have, in a jet, you have your fan jet, your ramjet, your turbo ramjet, your scramjet in here, your fuel. There is oxygen in the atmosphere. You compress it, you combust it, and you expel it out here for thrust, and you move this way. The efficiency of jets and rockets is real low, like it's usually under 10% if you're lucky. This technology cannot take us to New York in under an hour, or to Japan in under, New York in under a half hour, Japan in under an hour. It will not do it, it cannot do it. It is inefficient and it's very crude. The technology displayed by UFOs, whether they're our own or somebody else's, is basically beyond a scramjet. Let's generically call it field propulsion. And the reason we call it field propulsion is because, let's just draw a simple little disc here, like an acorn. It's not coming out of one end. It's not symmetric. It's basically emitted by the entire vehicle. Now, before I get into the details of this, there are several ways to power an aircraft that flies on field propulsion. One is you can use a magneto-hydrodynamic system, which is, I won't get into the details on that. That's loud and costly and expensive. The second way is we use a rotating bed reactor, which the military has. They're about twice the size of a beach ball, and they can put out gigawatts per pulse. That's billions of watts per pulse of energy. And that can power anything very quickly. The third way would be to use another form of nuclear energy. Now, we'll get into the Lazar tape a little later, but I should explain that if you read Aviation Week, or read Defense Electronics, which we'll be getting into a little later, this is the journal if you're in the military or work in military electronics you can subscribe to. They keep talking about that we have a surplus of antimatter. Well, why do we have a surplus if we don't need it? What are we using it for? We're not building the Starship Enterprise yet. Well, they said, well, it's a good fuel. For what? We can't build fusion reactors yet, so antimatter reactors we can't build either. Well, the third power technology, beyond magneto-hydrodynamic and rotating bed reactors, the power field propulsion, would be essentially antimatter. To give you an idea of the efficiency, a fission device is about a fission and fusion technologies are about 1/1800th% efficient, meaning the energy that's released is very inefficient in terms of its conversion of mass to energy. When you get into antimatter, if the proper arrangement of matter is involved, you have 100% conversion of matter to antimatter. So it's 1,800 times more powerful than fusion. And we can't build fusion reactors yet. Well, they tell us we can't. Field propulsion is not an idle dream. It's not something someone made up in their backyard. The researcher, I don't know if the name of John Searle, did that ring a bell to any of you? John Searle? Okay. He was back in London, in England, back many years ago, and he developed a a large prototype disk powered by a field-type generator. And what's intriguing is that he found that if he generated high enough potentials, like in the gigavolt or teravolt region, the energy would feed back on itself in a closed loop and you wouldn't have to pump more energy into it. How he prevented arcing, we don't know. But he was able to produce lift and thrust. And the theory is real simple. If you generate the right frequency and pulse envelope of electromagnetic radiation or energy, you can decouple from the Earth's gravity. And there was a researcher by the name of Dr. Robert Forward at Hughes Research in Malibu, who no longer is there. He's now working in antimatter research up in Oxnard. He published numerous papers on using field propulsion to develop anti-gravity technology. And of course, the military supposedly ignored this. But what I'm trying to get at here is that Searle developed the technology, and suddenly he disappeared. Then he reappeared and he had emotional problems and the government was after him, and I go, this sounds like a bad movie, but it's real. I work with a friend from TRW and General Dynamics who worked on the electromagnetic railguns. Do you know what railguns are? It's instead of propelling a projectile like a rocket or let's say a round from an M1 Abrams tank, with the explosive, you generate an electromagnetic field, a plasma, so to speak, and by creating different polarity structures, you can accelerate this projectile to up to maybe 15 or 20 kilometers per second, which will penetrate anything. And the reason they want to get an alternate means of accelerating projectiles is, one, for orbiting, putting things into low Earth orbit, two, for tanks. Remember the Gulf War we came through a couple years ago? You hear about all the troops that came back with these weird symptoms? You heard about that? They found out what the part of the problem is. In the A-10 Warthog, the aircraft that is a tank buster, and in the M1 Abrams tank, and in the Apache helicopter, they have a minigun, or sort of a very powerful 30mm Gatling gun that uses denatured uranium rounds, as does the M1 tank. They found out that these rounds are not as denatured as they thought they were. They spray radioactive clouds of uranium, which you breathe, and apparently starts killing people. Then they found that even sitting on the desk, you inhale the fumes and you start dying. So this is one problem no one thought of. So we're trying to get away from that. When people keep telling you we don't have the energy to power these types of fuel propulsions, let me make it real clear, we do. Again, in Aviation Week, a couple months ago, maybe 4 or 6 months ago, an article that Lawrence Livermore and Sandia Corporation and Los Alamos built a functional laser that pumped out over 30 trillion watts per pulse. And that's more energy than the entire United States puts out. This is in one pulse, in one system. So this whole story that we can't produce high energies is a lie. It's total disinformation. Even stranger is, remember when SDI got started, the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, they kept telling we're going to build these weapons. Well, strangely enough, this program started in the late 60s. Forget what Reagan did. The cover of Aviation Week, July 28, 1980, what you're looking at here is an X-ray beam fired from Los Alamos. Nuclear pumped X-ray beam. They said they couldn't do it. Guess what? They lied. They can do it. Another interesting thing, they said they couldn't have accurately shoot down missiles or planes with lasers. It was too expensive and they couldn't resolve the power problems. Well, according to Defense Electronics, before I get to that, I should mention, these two articles from Aviation Week are from the late 70s, particle beam weapons and laser weapons. They talk about our successes, not our failures at beam weapons. And this is the building up to the basic thought of the technology we have now is far beyond what they're telling us. The Defense Department, DoD's lethal laser development efforts, this is from Defense Electronics, April 93. The speed of light defense against anti-ship missiles built by TRW to replace forward-mounted 5-inch guns in U.S. Navy Ticonderoga-class cruisers. It's a multi-megawatt laser cannon that can fire up to 500 shots without refueling. It has a 20-mile range. It can destroy incoming, it's called, basically the formal name is a shipboard high-energy laser weapon, HELWEPS. And it has a millisecond response time. That means 1,000th of a second it takes to acquire the target and fire on the target. It can destroy hardened gun emplacements 12 miles away on a shore battery. Remember they said they can't do this? They're deploying this, they're putting this on aircraft carriers for cruise missile defense, on cruisers and destroyers and frigates. And before I get any more, the end of this, when asked if Star Trek's set phasers to stun scenario was still in the realm of sci-fi, the undisclosed commentator from TRW said, I don't know about being fieldable at this point, meaning deployable, but it is doable with today's technology, which means the phasers in Star Trek are real. We just can't put them out in someone's pocket yet. But what I'm getting at is that we have the ability to generate several trillion watts of energy in small pulses, and pulse power is very efficient. It's far more efficient than continuous wave power. And the way you maneuver this vehicle, as opposed to having ailerons or vertifans or rudders on this and moving air around, is you shift polarities. If you want to go up or down, you shift these polarities and pinch the electromagnetic field. And by doing it, you can induce pitch, yaw, or roll, induce thrust or lift. The same way that boats float on water, once you decouple from gravity by using the right field structure, the vehicle floats on gravity the way a ship floats on water. And what's intriguing is that the Aurora aircraft, if seen from a distance with scramjets operating at high altitude, the entire vehicle glows. It's called an afterburn. What they do is they can jettison fuel around the part of the fuselage, and it's an overburn on the actual fuselage, and the whole vehicle will glow. This isn't for camouflage. This apparently increases efficiency. With the technology we have today, we could take objects on Earth and put them in orbit for 1/500th the cost of the space shuttle. But we won't do it because it's not cost efficient yet. The major problem with field propulsion is, let's say you own part of Morton Thiokol, or Pratt & Whitney, who builds the engines, or GE, or McDonnell Douglas, or Grumman, who build these planes, or General Dynamics, or Lockheed. Are you going to go out of business because someone found a better mousetrap? No, you're not. The technology we have today is very impressive, but it doesn't demonstrate any evidence that we're using alien technology, at least in what we're flying. You're all familiar with like the F-22, the Advanced Tactical Fighter they're supposedly building, and it's in big trouble now. We wouldn't be building new jets if we had this. But then there's something that's strange on the same note. In last week's Aviation Week, remember this whole thing in Waco, Texas that started a couple months ago with the disastrous fire? The government has very exotic weapons technology. They can do a lot of strange things to people. And they wanted to test it in Waco to see if they could neutralize the people without killing them. We'll get into this much more later. And they thought, no, I don't think we should do this because it might tip our hand to our enemies as to what we have. So they said, okay, let's kill them. And that basically was in Aviation Week about 3 weeks ago. The people at the high level said, we can't just show this stuff because it's too soon. If the wrong people learn about it, we'll have a problem because it'll be out. So you know the result. What's intriguing about field propulsion is that imagine getting in your vehicle, maybe a 100-foot wide disc, accelerating to about 250,000 feet vertically. You climb vertically, vertical takeoff and landing. You reach your operational flight ceiling, and you traverse the Earth at about Mach 30, an excess of, well, just up to below escape velocity, otherwise you'll have problems. And you reach your destination and you vertically descend. Well, the problem is not only can you power the vehicle, can you get it there, how do you navigate at that speed? Remember, a few seconds of miscalculation by the helmsman or navigator and you're not only a few miles away, you're in another country, or maybe another continent. So how do you guide the aircraft? It's not that simple. Also, what about collisions? But who's up there? Who's at 240,000 feet? I don't think anyone's really flying at that altitude. Again, back to the SR-71. It frequently, well, not frequently, I know of at least 8 situations where it went suborbital, meaning it broke out of the Earth's atmosphere and went into a suborbital and had to come down and they had a lot of problems. With field propulsion, there's 2 different modes of field propulsion. One is for terrestrial applications, which we're talking about now, to get you anywhere on Earth within under an hour. That we can do today. When you go exoatmospheric, you leave the Earth's atmosphere, what works in the Earth's atmosphere will not work outside the Earth's atmosphere, because what you're using to function here is to react against the ambient gases in the Earth's atmosphere and to react against the electromagnetic fields in the Earth's atmosphere. Once you leave the Earth's atmosphere, they're not there in the same density as you have here. In order to travel to the nearest star, which is 4 light years away, even field propulsion, as it's configured here, let's say with a couple gigawatts, let's say 100 gigawatts of power, would still take you probably a couple hundred years. It's not efficient. And this is operating at something like 60 to 70% efficiency. It still won't get you there. We're not going to achieve superluminal travel with that. This brings us to Star Trek technology. There's only 2 ways to get interstellar travel developed in our lifetime. You're not going to do it with a rocket, you're not going to do it with thermonuclear propulsion, or exploding H-bombs behind you, pushing you through space. I mean, the only way you're going to do it, is by changing the nature of space. And this gets into Bob Lazar, which we'll get into in a moment. If you watch Star Trek, the old one, new one, you know what warp drive is. It's real simply, it's so simple, it's kind of pathetic, but it's realistic in the sense that it could work if we had enough money to build it. Okay, I'll try to. Okay, little Enterprise, cheap but effective. Okay, you're not spewing out an exhaust plume here and going like that. When they designed the Enterprise, back in the 60s, they had to give it a direction. If it just was a disk, it looks boring. It's not going anywhere, and it's not aesthetically pleasing. Well, I like this, I don't like these. But the way it's propelled is this. It generates a field of energy that takes normal linear space, like a piece of paper, and it warps it, produces a curved structure. Now, instead of having to go through all the space between the top and the bottom, you've taken away the space. If you take away the space, you take away the time. In this respect, space is time and time is space. They're inseparable. So, real simple. Someone says to you, how far do you live from here? You say, 10 minutes. You don't live 10 minutes from here. That's how long it takes you to drive there. If you were flying and had an S on your chest, it might take you a few seconds. So again, time is space and space is time, real simple. If you're traveling to, let's say, Zeta Reticuli, okay, 37 light years, okay, light years away, at velocities we're familiar with on Earth, you'll be dead buried in dust and recycled a few times before you even get close to it. At the speed of light, it would take you 37 years on Earth to reach there. When you reach the speed of light, we could reach the speed of light, on the ship, time would stand still relative to the Earth. So let's say Earth time 37 years goes by, and meanwhile you've only experienced a few weeks aboard the ship, or maybe days. Or more dramatic, Einstein was convinced you could circumnavigate the universe in 40 years at the speed of light. To give you an idea of how dramatic this is, the fastest operational vehicle that left our solar system was flying at 86,000 miles per hour. That's really moving. I mean, that's, you're up there. The speed of light is 186,234 miles per second, or more specifically, 670 million miles per hour. That's not exactly, we're not even in the ballpark. Forget being on first base. So the only way you're going to achieve it, now the big problem before we get to that, of traveling faster than light, so build bigger engines, carry more fuel. Can't do that. It won't work like that. As you speed up, the faster you go, the more mass you accumulate. And this is all energy in reality works like this. Even electricities. When you're measuring current and voltage won't hurt you. But really, the amperage is what kills you. Voltage is really the number of electrons going past a given point at a given time. Amperage is the speed at which the electron travels. The faster it travels, the more mass it gets, therefore the more energy it has. A few amps at relatively low voltage can fry you real easily. But a lot of voltage with a few microamps, millions of an amp, will tingle like a Tesla's device. It'll static over your body. In the same way, you can't achieve speed of light travel or superluminal travel by carrying more fuel, because the faster you go and the greater your acceleration becomes and velocity becomes, the more massive your vehicle becomes. And it takes an infinite amount of energy to reach the speed of light. Therefore, it can't be achieved by linear acceleration. So if you're suddenly, when you watch the TV series, the light, they try to be really accurate about this. The light, you see the blue flash when it goes into warp drive, it's supposed to be Cherenkov radiation. It's a radiation that's produced when something exceeds light speed in a dielectric medium, if that means anything to you. I hope it does. And what's really intriguing, I don't know if you watch the show, I do because I've been associated with it for a long time. Last week, not this last Monday, a week ago Monday, I'll be 2 weeks ago Monday, this Monday, they had a show that dealt with some unusual temporal anomalies. And they used a term called artificial quantum singularity. And this is really intriguing because I heard that term in 1979 from a researcher at a major aerospace facility who claimed that we, whether it was with aliens or not, had been able to produce artificial quantum singularities, micro-miniature, humanly produced black holes that produced power. And in the series, what this was a way to power the Romulan warp drive. God knows how that works, but when I looked over my notes, I go, that's the same exact term he used in '79. And he said they achieved this by, they were able to collapse, produce artificial gravitational collapse by using microwaves in a certain fashion. I thought, wait a minute, microwaves are an artifact of UFO propulsion. And then he talked about the use of antimatter. This was in '79, and then he mummed up on me. And all I can tell you is that he worked for a major research facility, and you'd know the name. It's like, I can't mention who or what firm, but you'd know the name. He also told me that we had obtained through various means craft that weren't built here. And we were trying to back engineer them, but we didn't know how they operated. It'd be like giving an Aborigine a B-2 bomber. As primitive as that I think it is. I mean, it's still subsonic, who cares? You could get in it, maybe you could crank the turbofans over and get it to roll out in the apron, maybe even lift it off. You'd probably crash, but if you ask them, well, how's it propelled? They go, beats me. That's where we are. If we have extraterrestrial vehicles, I don't think we understand the technology. It'd be like, imagine going back 40 years, yeah, and bring someone a cellular phone. They look at you like, well, what is it? Or a VCR. It wouldn't work. But to get on with this, you accelerate, you warp space, and therefore you're changing the structure of space. And you then exceed light speed in a way that a person watching you wouldn't see you. They'd see your ship, like in the TV series, stretch out, and then there'd be a blue flash of Cherenkov radiation. You would disappear, and you would seem to appear wherever you're going, although it would take time. If someone were monitoring your body on the Earth when you were in warp drive, they'd hear the heartbeat going, and then it would slow down, and then when you hit light speed, which would be instantaneous, they'd record one more heartbeat, and they'd never get another heartbeat from you. Because time relative from where you are to where they are wouldn't exist anymore. Your time would be standing still. Now, if you watch the show, I hate to keep referencing the show, but it's the only thing around you can talk about in this respect. You know, they talk about how long it takes to get from star system to star system. It's not really quite accurate. It's actually, if you read over the history of the show, it's a lot more rapid than that. They could run around the galaxy in no time at all, but otherwise the show would be very boring because they'd get where they want to go in a matter of minutes, and it'd be like going to the corner to get, coffee. This technology has limitations because you still take time to go where you're going. You have to accelerate and decelerate. You also have to know where you're going before you get there. Because if you come out of this warp reality too late or too early, you might be millions of kilometers behind or in front of where you're going. So it's not that simple. In the same way, there's problems with this. You're traveling at, let's say, warp 9, whatever that is, with their stupid temporal problem of exceeding that speed, which for dramatic license. You're traveling at that speed, and you're aging normally aboard the ship. Meanwhile, people on Earth are aged hundreds or thousands of years. They come back, everyone's dead. It can't work that way. It wouldn't work that way. But what it could do, it could take us anywhere we wanted to go, theoretically, in a finite period of time. So instead of spending years or decades or generations aboard a starship, you could get where you wanted to go in a matter of minutes, within, let's say, a couple thousand light years. Now, the galaxy we live in is 100,000 light years in diameter, so that's a pretty good distance. They could travel that in maybe one episode. But then they have other problems with the show. Did you happen to see the disaster called Deep Space Nine? You ever watch that? I stopped watching it after the pilot because they had the biggest error. Remember, this is powered by antimatter, and the way they achieve this, forget the dilithium garbage, we call that unobtainium because you can't get any. Okay, doesn't exist. What you do is you produce a controlled implosion of antimatter You annihilate matter and antimatter. You control an implosion, not an explosion, and that implosion warps space. Now, in the show, they have fuel bins of deuterium and anti-deuterium. And I said, did the people go to sleep making the show? You don't need fuel aboard a starship that travels faster than light that uses antimatter. Real simple. You got a ship with 1,200 people on board it. Aside from the materials from which the ship is made, what is the most abundant element on board the vehicle? You're close. You're close, but that's not it. What is the most abundant element? You're in the ballpark, but in the wrong end of the body. Right. Carbon dioxide. We're all exhaling it every second we breathe. Now, you have reactors on board which power the vehicle. You take the oxygen, recycle it, revitalize it for air, like in nuclear submarines. You have air as long as you want. You take the carbon, you recycle it, you revitalize it, you break it into carbon and anti-carbon, you bring it back together, you've got power for as long as you breathe. As long as you have humans that are breathing oxygen that expels CO2, you've got energy. And it will never exhaust itself as long as you're alive. But they have to make it work with polluting nuclear material. Anyway, it's whatever. The whole basis of this is it still produces problems in real time. If we could have aircraft that don't require huge engines and don't burn fuel, what about all the billions of dollars that they pour in with fuel every day and every week and every year? Where does it go? It's gone. We're not going to see this technology in our lifetime. We're not going to see it very likely in the next 200 years. Well, 150 years if we're still here. We're not going to see warp drive. Well, the reason we won't see warp drive is because there's no need, right now, no one wants to go to the stars because no one cares. And we can't, if we knew something out there was better than it is here, we'd all want to leave. Maybe some of us want to leave, I would. But this technology could be built within 60 years if there was a concerted effort. It would cost probably a couple $1 trillion. But we could fan out from the Earth and live. What I wanted to get before I forgot this really bad mistake in Star Trek. They supposed to have technical advisors which occasionally mess up. The first episode of Deep Space Nine, someone has an antimatter bomb. It's a clump of it in a magnetic bottle. And it's stolen aboard one of their little runabouts or shuttles. And they said it has make a point of saying in the show it has enough power to destroy an entire planet. Okay, I can accept that. I mean, it's very potent stuff. Then they go on to say in the old series that if the Enterprise detonated, the old one, it destroyed everything in an 800,000 kilometer radius. Okay. Meanwhile, this huge chunk of antimatter gets sucked out of the ship in a bottle. It detonates a few yards away from the shuttle, and nothing happens. It's like a firecracker. Bang! They go, okay. I'm going like, did someone go to sleep or what? Very strange. Okay, so we've gone from fan jets to ramjets to scramjets to field propulsion to warp drive. Now, beyond this, a guy named Alan Holt devised a technology called field resonance propulsion. It doesn't involve traveling from point A to point B in terms of not even warp drive, because warp drive is semi-linear. Field resonance propulsion is where you determine the resonance, the spatial frequency resonance of wherever you're going, Zeta Reticuli, whatever. And before you get there, you tune the field of where you're going to there, and you disappear from where you are and appear there. And there's no time differential, meaning you don't lose any time, meaning it's instantaneous. It's much more efficient than this, but how do you know what the spectral frequency characteristic is, the spectral resonance is of where you're going if you haven't been there? It's like you want to go to Anaheim. Well, where is it? I don't know, I've never been there. And there are no maps. So there are major problems. But one of the patents I have is on field propulsion, not warp drive, because we can't build that yet, and not on field resonance, but it is a field propulsion. We've tested small modules of them, and they do work. And we put in 20 kilowatts of pulse power. We got a 2-foot disc to hover and produce lift, and it was very impressive. It went through my friend's roof and destroyed his marriage, and very impressive. Another one bites the dust. Anyway, we tried to commercialize it. Took it to Rocketdyne, took it to JPL, the World Space Foundation, And they said, well, it's a weapon system. I said, well, gee, a fork and a knife is a weapon system, but you can use it to eat with, or you could use it to stab somebody with. And well, see, one of the unique characteristics of field propulsion, which makes it very, very applicable to defense technology, is because there's no exhaust plume, meaning you're not exploding propellant, you know, or an oxidizer in propellant as in a rocket as opposed to a jet, you can't track it on infrared. So imaging, you know, focal plane arrays for infrared imaging won't work. Also, because you're producing a field of electromagnetic radiation, that one of the artifacts of which is microwave energy, it tends to absorb and diffuse incoming microwave radiation, which is what radar is. And it does not reflect, therefore you can't paint it, you can't get a signature on it. So I said, it's a stealth technology. I said, well, that's one of the byproducts of it. And we ran the circles, and they said, well, even if it works, who cares? I said, this would change every way we move on the Earth. And they said, but we don't need it. And even the SDIO office, which we dealt with, the same mentality. Why should we change now? We have rockets and jets. They have no desire or need to travel more efficiently. So there you have why we're not moving forward with field propulsion technology.
Take it to Mattel.
Right. No, they have to go to Mexico. No one can build it there. No, strangely enough, I dealt with Mattel, not dealing with this. I brought them an electronic Ouija board back in 1978. And they didn't buy it because it frightened them. And because it was too sensitive for human use. I said, well, who else is going to use it? You know, so, but anyway, they didn't buy anything from us. What's important about this technology is that it can free us from the limitations we currently have in terms of movement on the planet. It will make the world a lot smaller, a lot more efficient, but it also makes it a lot more dangerous because once this technology is developed, the only way you're going to see an enemy coming if you go into a war scenario is as they approach you to destroy you. Line of sight, LIDAR can pick them up, but that's right before they hit you. I mean, you go, oh, they're there, and then you're gone. So it isn't real practical to use this for warfare because it's too efficient. But before we get into, I want to make a little jump here to some of these strange technologies that are interrelated with this. There was a book written in 1974 called Mind Wars by Ron McCrae. And this was he used to work with Jack Anderson. And he started looking into the government secret research into psychotronic weapons. And it sounds like so much gobbledygook to most people, but it isn't. The kind of weird weaponry developed that is very disturbing. And I know they built these, I know they tested some of them. And to show you how strange things are, that we can build technology, deploy it, and no one will ever know it's around because we don't use it. This comes from 1984, and one of the first devices they mentioned was a microwave rifle. It does not fire bullets or beams of coherent energy. It fires collimated beams of microwaves that can do one of several things. It can be tuned to the water in your body, which is what makes things cook in a microwave oven, and it can cook you from a distance, or it can make your cells explode, your body just burst apart. This is from over 100 yards. Or they can tune it to specific genes in your body. Let's say the genes that produce adrenaline, and they can neutralize those genes, so you'll never again get excited about anything. And they built the technology. So it's a little disturbing, but even more so, another weapon that was developed is called a psychic neuron disruptor. Basically, it's an electronic paranoia inducer. It belonged to the Republican Party. This device interferes with the synaptic connections of the nerve cells in the brain and induces temporary states of confusion, disorientation, memory impairment, loss of concentration, and paranoia. Utilizes the combination of radio frequency energy and ELF radiation, extremely low frequency. It was tested and apparently it worked very well, but it hasn't been used in the field as far as we know. Another device, Pardon? No, it hasn't been used in open warfare is what I'm saying. Another device is called the LIDA-4, L-I-D-A-4. Now these devices were always broke down in some articles from the Defense Intelligence Agency, declassified in 1975. And when you get to the real good stuff, the details, the specifications of the weapons, the pages go blank, or they're blacked out. The LIDA-4 is an electronic device, technically referred to as radio sleep, which can put large groups or populations of individuals to sleep at a distance without their consent to the use of controlled application of extremely low frequency and radio frequency radiation. No, but I mean, it may be related because maybe the frequencies are the same. Another device, you'll love this one. It's called the photonic barrier modulator. Boy, also Thomas Bearden talks about some of this in his work, Fer-de-Lance, as well. It's called basically an electronic amplifier and focusing device for psychokinetic forces. By inserting a photograph of the desired target, object, or person, that target can be disabled or destroyed. Supposedly excellent for transmitting illness and/or death via biological disorders. Supposedly responsible for the sinking of the U.S. nuclear submarines Thresher in '63 and Scorpion in '67 with all hands on board. This is from the book. I'm not saying it's real or it isn't. The next one is very ominous. A hyperspatial nuclear howitzer. I love these terms. It's great for television. Okay, you set off a nuclear detonation or device in a controlled environment, and then you transmit its entire effect, light, thermal pulse, blast, EMP, and radiation, to a limitless number of distant sites without warning once receivers have been previously planted at those locations. No missile delivery system is used. Let me give you what this involves.
Are you saying Bearden's work is correct?
Bearden, some of his work is real. I don't know how much, but let's say, here's the years, let's say in what was once the USSR, which is, you have a big dome and you detonate a thermonuclear device, and then someone, before they do that, puts all these receivers in some other part of the globe, and after that's detonated, suddenly you have nuclear explosions occurring in all these receivers. But there's no missile delivering it.
How do they do that?
It's called, this is called, all it says is a hyperspatial nuclear howitzer. It's going through what they called hyperspace. But again, I was very skeptical. And if you try to get the documents on this from the Defense Documentation Center, they're still classified. So it makes me wonder how real or unreal it is. This is one you're really going to like.
Have you seen the Discovery Space Shuttle UFO the show?
Yeah. Yeah, I was very impressed with that, especially when they kept saying it's a piece of ice. I love that. When it's a piece of ice or it's some debris floating in space that changed trajectory and accelerated, that was a very impressive piece of work on the part of NASA. They're really good at coming up with excuses. But this next device is even more impressive. I'm embarrassed to even discuss it. An anti-missile time warp. I mean, the ultimate anti-ballistic missile system wherein fields of energy are transmitted up from the Earth to intercept incoming ICBM MIRVs in their mid-course busing or terminal course phase and literally send them backwards in time. Say to the era of the dinosaurs, Jurassic Park, where they would be harmlessly destroyed except, of course, the dinosaur. I mean, just read the book. Don't believe me. Another one is called SADDOR, S-A-D-D-O-R. It's called a satellite deployed dowsing rod. I can't believe people come up with this stuff. Could make the MX and mobile ICBM Midget Man obsolete before they were even deployed, which now they're not going anywhere. A Soviet psychic telepathically connected to SADDOR could pinpoint the exact location of any person, missile, or, on the Earth. Well, I don't think they worry about the Soviets doing anything about that right now. But what's intriguing is that all this work in high-energy weapons, directed energy weapons, coming out of the United States, was based on the fact that the Soviets were doing this. They were doing it, but they went broke. That's why everything fell apart. We're now going broke, because we can't do it. And nobody seems to want to live up to it. And then to make matters worse, if you read these defense electronics journals, this is one I like here. New weapons that win without killing. Very impressive. Well, are any of you old TV fans from the 60s? Remember the series called Outer Limits? Remember there was an episode called Soldier with Michael and Sarah? My name's Qualo, Twim, DMDO. Remember that? Where a soldier from the future comes through and they're trying to kill each other with these very impressive weapons and sort of uniforms? Well, the military has finally done the reality. they've actually developed a anti-personnel laser rifle. It not only can blind you, but it can punch holes in you from up to 75 yards. Actually, it's very impressive, and they've even got a great name for it, an infantry self-defense system. And the ultimate enhancement in combat effectiveness for detecting threat targets and instantly destroying them or neutralizing them. I love it. Just fantastic. And even in the same article, it says here, the DoD, Department of Defense, and many industry officials deny the existence of a laser rifle, but they got a picture of it in here for those of you who don't believe in it. Considering the program's black or classified status, as with the F-15 stealth fighter more recently regarding growing evidence cited a number of news reports the existence of Aurora, said to be a hypersonic replacement of the SR-71. Our own sources in the Pentagon refuse to discuss the matter. And this is defense electronics. So you see the problem we're having. They get into something even more insidious. There's a man named Dr. David Frey, F-R-E-Y, and he found a way to produce microwaves that couple with the auditory nerve and the cerebral cortex. And this is the device for controlled auditory hallucinations, which means this person could be in another room with this technology, beam collimated microwaves, a specific pulse envelope, at your head, and they could say something like, eat that food, or jump off that building, or step on the gas. And in your own mind, not in your ear, it bypasses the outer ear, you'd hear them saying what they're saying in your own voice in your head. It's inductive auditory coupling. Does not involve the outer ear. You realize the implications for that? I mean, you could hear, let's say they said, oh, jump off the building. You go, God, I keep telling myself to jump off a building. Maybe I should. And this was developed in the 60s. Now, to show you the implications of this, I'm sure all of you own microwave ovens, right? Yes? Okay. You use them, right? Do you stand in front of them when they're on? Do you stand in the room when they're on? Well, good. There's only one microwave oven that's made that is safe in terms of what's considered biologically safe. It's the Amana, the high-end Amana. The energy emitted by microwave ovens in the milliwatt per square centimeter region is sufficient to cause glaucoma, cataracts, interfere with the T-wave of your heart, alter blood chemistry, and have irreversible chromosomal aberrations in your body from cumulative exposure to low-level microwave radiation. The Soviet and the ex-Soviet and the European theater have microwatt per square centimeter exposures, which is 3 orders of magnitude lower. There's a document was published by the Defense Department back in the 70s on the biological effects of microwave radiation. It's since been reclassified. And it talks about the effects of very low levels of microwave energy. Remember the big problem with cellular phones? They were worried about brain cancer and all the fact, and they said, there's no problem. Well, don't believe what you're hearing. If you read the government's own data, they set 900 megahertz, which is the low-end microwave spectrum, at the power levels of a watt, or even half a watt or a quarter of a watt near your head, can have very serious cellular implications to your body. It won't work on everybody, but some people it will affect disastrously, other people it won't affect at all. So I wouldn't own a cellular phone, but let's go on this. Other non-lethal technologies, acoustic beams, sound. This is called high-frequency acoustic bullets. The acoustic beam weapon uses, used against protected facilities and against personnel. It's developed in 1979, has been developed since then. An acoustic bullet would incapacitate by creating plasma in front of the target, which creates an impact wave that is just like a blunt bullet. It causes blunt object trauma, like being hit by a baseball. Traditional bullets cause ripping, tearing. This is something different because the plasma creates the impact. So they compare the effect of high-power acoustic bullets to low-frequency acoustic weapon to discomfort felt by persons standing next to a large air horn as it is sounded. Now, you know anything about infrasound, infrasonics. At that, you know when someone yells loud or they scream or they sing, they can shatter glass by resonating? The same effect can occur with certain frequencies of sound. And this can basically leave you totally disoriented. I mean, completely disoriented to the point where you can't even act in a theater of battle. So remember that's the episode of Outer Limits. He had a helmet and a suit. They've now developed a suit that has protective goggles for your eyes, protective ears, have electronic communication, has a built-in laser that comes out of your finger, where we point with your finger to destroy enemy or blind people, and has, on the other hand, has an acoustic weapon. They could fire a small acoustic plasma at people. And you wear a backpack with a big coil that goes to your rifle. You could shoot off maybe a couple hundred rounds of laser energy at people. And this was published in one of the Army's personnel. And it won't be around for a while, but it's there. Now, they used to say we couldn't get a lot of power in a laser in a small area. Wrong. They now have tabletop lasers that could fit on any one of these little cars, putting out 45 kilowatts. And you only need a few hundred watts to cut through steel. You know what 45 kilowatts would do to a human being at 100 yards? You'd be toast. You know, you'd be fried. The size of the table, now, they're acknowledging that. That means they could probably get into a handheld, fieldable weapon within less than 5 years. You know what an Abrams M1 tank is, you saw in the Gulf War. They have, Avro company developed an electric discharge laser, 5 megawatts. It was called the mid-infrared chemical laser, was one of them. And it could fire pulses of up to over 5 megawatts. And instead of hitting a tank with a round of denatured uranium, they hit it with a pulse of several megawatts of energy. Well, actually, per square centimeter, it's several terawatts per square centimeter. And it sort of disintegrates and breaks apart the molecular structure of the chromium armor in the tank. And suddenly you have a hole where the armor once was, and you're toast. This happens in about 8 milliseconds. And the delivery time is even shorter because it's the speed of light. So the technology's there, and what they wanted to do in Waco was use these acoustic weapons, the microwave disorientation weapons, and they call stingray lasers to blind everybody. And they actually were at the point of delivering them to Waco. The Defense Department said, we can't do this. It'll show our hand. And I thought, to who? Who are they going to show our hand to? More impressive. You've heard, I'm sure, you know what an EMP is, electromagnetic pulse? When you detonate a nuclear device, what precedes the blast, but not the light, is the pulse of electromagnetic energy that destroys solid-state electronics. And we have the weapons now, obviously, but we don't want to use nuclear energy. It's called NNEMP, non-nuclear driven EMPs. And they have them now mounted in the noses of cruise missiles. And they can fly these over areas and pulse the weapon down, the beam of radiation of the electromagnetic pulse down over areas. And each missile has up to 12 to 20 terawatts per pulse per missile. That's enough to completely disable an entire city. And that's per missile. And this has not been just developed, they have them online. How they tested them was at the Air Force facilities and weapons labs, they blanketed huge areas and they knocked out everything they wanted to. And miles beyond the test range, no cars would start, nothing electronic would operate. Everyone had to have their cars towed away and their ignition systems replaced because they're modern solid-state technology. They wouldn't operate. They go, well, I guess the technology works. And they had to pay for the repairing of all the electronic modules on everyone's cars. They didn't know that it went even further, and some of the supposedly radiation-hardened control modules on, let's say, F-16s or F-15s, they refuse to operate because terawatt pulses of EMPs go through anything. So the technology works real well. The question is whether we use it or deploy it or not is still debatable. But
How would UFOs disable cars?
well, put it this way. There's several ways to disable electronics, whether they're solid state or not. One is if you've read the work by Ufology by James McCampbell. Okay, the question was how would UFOs disable cars? One way to do that is by using a high-energy microwave field. And if you read James McCampbell's book, Ufology, he talks about that in there. And what it does, it increases the resistance in coils and in circuitry, and the electrons will not flow. Therefore, you get no current. Therefore, nothing operates. Another way is using a pulsed or a high-strength magnetic field. This can also neutralize electronics. What I want to get to here is we talked about warp drive, and I want to get on to really an important thing. You've all saw the Lazar tape, right? Well, It's interesting, but there's a lot of problems with it. First of all, did you feel that he was sort of talking down to you at some points, like condescending, like, you don't know this and you're stupid, so I'm not going to get into this? Did you ever sort of feel that? Like, in the beginning he kind of said, since you're not educated, I'm not going to get into certain things. What he didn't say was worse than what he did say. He talks about this element 115, assuming it exists, which is a big assumption. And it conveniently only can occur in a binary star system, which doesn't bother me because most stars are binary or trinary. But then he describes the configuration which it's in, and it's a lousy thermoelectric generator. BFD, I won't say the middle word, but big deal. We can build those now. So it's more efficient. Who cares? Then he tells how they have these, they radiate gravity waves out these arrays, and he shows these crude, mechanically articulated arrays. I'm going like, what is this, the 1950s? Didn't he hear of a phased array system that's electronically coupled? I'm going like, wait a minute. But that's not worse. If you watch the video again, if you're not bored to death, what you'll discover, he never tells how that gravity wave is amplified or how it's used to produce anti-gravity. Yes?
Or how do you accelerate protons that
Right.
fall away?
Right. The man just asked how you accelerate protons. That was another point I was coming to. He shows this little, like a hemisphere and a little tube running into it. And he said, okay, there's a proton coming in that hits the element 115 and dislodges particles of antimatter. First of all, what's the source of the protons? He doesn't tell us that. Secondly, how do you get a proton up to relativistic speed in a few inches? We can't do it. And it's hard to accelerate things quickly in a short space, unless you're doing warp drive in a couple of inches. And then, once he gets this gravity A wave or B wave, and he produces a lobe of gravity to where it's supposed to go, okay, well, what if you're only going in the near interstellar neighborhood? Okay, one lobe will get you there. What I mean by that is, here's the ship, right? And it produces a gravity lobe to pull you to where you're going through warp space. But what if your star isn't here? What if it's way over there? You've got to pulse the system. Repeat it so when you get over here, the second pulse takes over and kicks in and keeps you going. Otherwise, you're only going to go one distance and no more. He doesn't tell you that. But how is element 115 and the antimatter for the thermoelectric generator used to produce anti-gravity and gravity waves? He doesn't tell us that. So you're left with, well, good science fiction, but nothing more. And it's very disturbing because if this is all they've learned in 15 years, we're in trouble. Yes?
We were talking about this in George Knapp's workshop at the UFO SOS. I suspect that what happened is that the Lazar doesn't have the education he claimed, and he claimed to have that education in order to get credibility for his overall experience, and he kind of had to try to fabricate some physics and some bad physics to cover up these gaps in his education. And he probably has like some glimmering of what's happening, like you're talking about here, but he isn't articulating it very well. But he puts out what he can to try and get the idea out overall. So it's kind of like a pointing finger in a way, rather than the actual facts.
So what you're saying, your comment is that you think Lazar is either not sufficiently educated to adequately articulate what's happening, or he's purposely withholding the information.
I think it's the former. I mean, he was there. I suspect he was there. It's just that he doesn't have the background to really fully explain.
See, I agree with your consensus that there's a problem regarding Lazar's tape. It's a major one, but I don't necessarily, well, put it this way, the only reason I give any credibility is because of what I heard from people in high places in the aerospace research community back in the late 70s, before Lazar was even around, that correlated to what he's saying now. He just seems to be extending the envelope a little bit, but he's still not supplying information you can utilize anyway. It's like getting a schematic getting a circuit schematic, and it's half the circuit's missing. You know, the component, a couple diodes are missing, capacitors out. You know, and you're looking, well, what are the components? I don't know. What are their values? I don't know. Well, then you can't build anything. And to give us a lousy thermoelectric generator for all that, I'm not impressed. I must admit that some of the videos I've seen are interesting and intriguing, and I do know that the Tonopah test range is probably the most secure place on Earth in terms of, controlled environments. But I don't know. I'm just very skeptical because of what he didn't say. And your comment about was a man in the back, about where do you get a proton of that energy level? How do you accelerate it to relativistic speeds, which means close to the speed of light in a few inches to... And also, by the way, remember he mentioned in the tape, if you remember this, that they actually sawed open one of the antimatter reactors in an underground chamber. Remember that? Yeah. And it detonated? Yeah. Could anyone, including government scientists, be that stupid?
Yes.
No. I mean, these people are dumb, but it'd be like standing behind an SR-71's engine when it ignited. Let's see if it's blue or red in there, you know? No, but see, what the date he gives for the supposedly detonation, there was a unscheduled nuclear test on that date, which is interesting. And he claims all these people died. Well, are there any death notices for these people? I mean, are there obituaries we can track down? Did anyone bother to do that? Did he give their names? No. So I'm very suspicious. And also, if it's an antimatter reactor, they can generate that kind of power to warp that amount of space. You realize that 2.2 pounds of antimatter has enough energy in it to destroy the surface of the entire continental United States? Take two of your fists, put them together. If that were antimatter annihilated, it could destroy the entire surface area of the continental United States, blowing the atmosphere over it out completely. We'd be wasteland. Now, if they had 2 kilograms of that in a reactor and that detonated, do you think that would be contained in a little underground test chamber? I don't think so. You would have had a big mushroom cloud in Nevada, and there'd be a big crater where most of Tonopah is right now. So there's a problem. Someone's lying, and I'd be willing to bet that we have had access to alien vehicles through crashes. Maybe they gave us some. But again, imagine you are some extraterrestrial race coming to Earth, and you said, well, it's better to work with the natives rather than fight them, okay? So they know how curious we are and how suckerish we are. So they gave, hey, here's a carrot and a stick. Come on. We'll give you this to play with, and you give us what we want, and you can play with the carrot. Here. And they know that what we're going to get out of it is a little explosion. We could fly it around, do some crazy things, but we can't make use of it. And maybe Lazar's right. Maybe if there is a nuclear element 115 that's only found in binary star systems, we can't reproduce the technology. And you know what, if we could, you know what the first thing we'd build with it? Not an aircraft, not a spacecraft, a bomb. So we're really going to make use of it. I mean, it's going to be great. One thing I wanted to say was on this non-lethal weapon technology. When we invaded Iraq, we had the option of using all this non-lethal technology to knock out Iraq's military might without even firing a shot. Guess why they didn't want to do it, besides tipping their hand? We couldn't have expended our weapons and needed them to build new ones. If you don't use them, you can't build new ones. You got to lose enough planes, enough ships, enough armament, and then you can replace the ordnance. If they're still there, why build new ones? It's an excuse. Are you aware of the fact, this is kind of weird, before we dropped the first nuclear weapons on Japan in '45, we were planning to invade it. We took millions of tons of hardware, jeeps, tanks, guns, everything, and on the islands. Well, we never invaded, as you know. The war ended after we dropped 2 nuclear bombs. Where do you think that all that military hardware went? No, not in the ocean. It went to North Korea. It went to North Vietnam. Where were the next 2 wars we fought? North Korea and Vietnam. You understand? You see the picture? We're engineering our wars. These aren't wars of attrition. These aren't wars of egos battling. These aren't one church fighting another. It's a money-making game. Well, right, inventory clearance, but it's also the people that build the weapons make fortunes. You know that John Kennedy's father, the senior, he was dealing with the Nazis up until 1943, selling them materials to build war machines. It's a game, and we're still playing it. It's no coincidence we gave the stuff to North Korea, North Vietnam, and then we go fight them against our own weapons. Gee, it's really weird. It's like giving a burglar a gun and saying, use it, don't mind. We're living in weird times. That's why warp drive and these technologies won't ever become commercialized in our lifetime, because if these go online, the war as we know it ends. There is no more war. It's over. When you can get anyone on Earth in 50 minutes, there can't be war. You deliver a weapon and you can't stop the delivery technology, there's no more war. You deliver nuclear weapons through hyperspace, there's no more war. You can vaporize soldiers on a field, there's no more war. If you disorient a whole battalion of soldiers. There's no more war. These weapons are too good. They might be used in experimental situations, but they're not going to be used on wide-scale deployment. And there's a question back there?
Yes, today they dropped ordinary bombs on Iraq.
Yes.
Just one
Oh,
bomb.
yeah. I mean, it's said today they dropped, or we attacked Iraq with 23 cruise missiles. And, you know, cruise missiles are impressive, but I mean, if they wanted to stop Iraq, send over about 10 of these EMP cruise missiles. And everything they use, from cars to lights, will be out for the next 5 years. They won't even be able to move a Jeep. But they can't do that because then we can't fight them anymore. See what I'm saying? It works too well. If you can get from here to New York in 22 minutes, and the cost of fuel is 18 to 20 cents per person, they can't charge you $200 to get there, can they? See what I'm saying? It's too efficient. I dealt with the LAPD back in the early 80s about an anti-personnel weapon that could stun crowds of people, to knock them out like in a riot situation. They were interested, and they said, could you do it? And I said, well, yeah, and they never proceeded along that line. When I dealt with Mattel, they turned me down. They met with me. This is the weirdest scenario I ever had. I met with these heads of Mattel in a big home in Palos Verdes, and the guy said, well, we don't want your electronic Ouija board. He says, can you build a, you know, did you ever see the movie Sleeper? I went, yeah. Well, you know the machine people went in, they had orgasms? I'm going like, oh, God. He wanted to build a device called an orgasmatron. These are men who own abortion clinics. I'm serious about this. You'd go in the machine, you push a button, it would electronically stimulate your brain, you'd have an orgasm. They were dead serious. And I said, you want to build this? He said, could you? I said, yes. Would you? I said, no. Why? Well, because we know little about that part of the brain. We know even less about the effects of electronic stimulation on that part of the brain. And I said, I wouldn't be responsible. Well, give us it and we'll do it. I said, no, I don't think so. You see what I'm saying? It's like, and they could put these booths on corners and charge like $10 to go walk in. I mean, they were serious. This wasn't a joke. And I just said, no, I'm really not interested in doing that. It's not my cup of tea. But they wouldn't get involved in any funding of anything else. The attitude of the community of science is a very conservative one. And if you make a better mousetrap, they don't beat a path to your door. It doesn't work like that. We realize that the first shuttle that was designed is not the shuttle we're seeing now, because the one they built returned under its own power, it didn't return in the gliding mode, and it was abandoned because of cost overrun. Well, what else is new? One of the things I want to mention is the government is infamous for coming up with projects it can't fund. And this is an example. See this aircraft? This was the A-12, the Navy's new attack aircraft. It was designed, they were going to go into production. They suddenly found out they were overrun like 48 to 50%. It would fly, all the big magazines carried the story, and it was dropped. But if you look at the vehicle, it's even better than the B-2. And then, I should pull up one other thing because all this stuff falls off here. There's a, well, that's one other thing I want to get out here. This vehicle accompanied the F-117 to Iraq, the TR-3A. It's a laser target designation aircraft. It comes in, designates targets with lasers for the guided for guided munitions. You won't see this in declassified probably for about another 3 to 5 years. And in the article, they talk about other technologies as well. They talk about the Aurora-type aircraft. They can drop up to 80 separate submunitions, some nuclear at one time. Well, that's it. Who are you fighting? There is no one to fight. So we've got a problem. We've got all this great technology that can get us to realize that field propulsion, we could go to the moon in a matter of hours. We'd go to anywhere on Earth within minutes, but we're not going to see it in our lifetime. The technology is there, the opportunity is there, the interest is not there. They said, wait till we run out of chemical fuels, and then we'll build what you want, which will be somewhere around 2060. Yes?
What are your medical patents in an aerospace?
Oh, what are the medical patents are, one device is a device for women. It's an ovulation determinator. It measures biopotential on the hand It can detect the approach and occurrence of ovulation in women, non-invasively. So you can use it as a birth control or fertility enhancement. Another device is a multi-organ diagnostic system. It measures the monitors the internal organs non-invasively. It can tell you the immediate and impending state of your internal organs. A third device is a computer-enhanced voice stress analyzer. It's the 5th generation lie detector that can differentiate between truth, stress, stress independent of deception and emotional disorder. So you can't lie and get away with it. The only way would be if you're repeating disinformation or misinformation. Fourth device is, remember the jet injector in Star Trek? This is the real one, but it's better than what they have out now because you don't know you're being injected. There's no sensation, and it can inject subcutaneous intramuscular. The 5th device is a luminous tongue depressor, real simple for those people. Just pushes your tongue down, lights the mouth, and throw it up at one time. The 6th patent is a cryogenic remote sensing physiograph, CRESP. It, again, out of Star Trek, you lay on the bed, it records brain waves, heart rate, respiration, and muscle activity without electric contact on the body from up to 12 feet distance. And the aerospace patent is field propulsion. And I have about as much chance of selling these in my lifetime as I do of growing a foot in the next 2 minutes. It's like trying to sell a caveman a car. They're going like, why do we need it? How much money? Oh, then the companies say, we didn't invent it, we're not going to buy it. Or, well, you get to the FDA, get their approval, and then, once you get the approval, build us the market prototype, the production prototype, and maybe we'll license it and give you 1/10 of a cent on the dollar. So it's not easy to do. Yes?
With all these governmental programs that have been going on the last 30 years, how are they funding all this stuff without us seeing it? Obviously, we have the black budget, we know about that, but
it's called how they fund government black projects, it's called a Make Works program. They fund anything if the need exists, whether it's hypersonic aircraft or new delivery technology or new type of tactical nuclear weapons. They have new weapons now because since Iraq, they can penetrate up to 30 feet of concrete and then detonate. They burrow into an area and then they explode from the inside out. If they have a need for it, if some lunatic thinks of it in a think tank, it'll come out. But a lot of stuff will never get deployed in the field because it's just too efficient. A lot of weapons technology came out of actually the 60s and the 70s that was never fielded because, it would have ended warfare. So we see all these great articles, but nothing happens. Any other questions or comments or what was that question?
you mentioned about the speed of the Aurora, and that's not a field propulsion.
No, the Aurora is powered by a dual bypass engine, a turbo ramjet like the SR-71, and then it kicks into a liquid methane-powered scramjet.
You mentioned 0 to 69 Gs.
Oh, no.
Well, whatever. That's a lot of Gs going 12,000 miles an hour. How does that work physiologically on the pilot?
All that I know is that it's crewed by manned by a crew of 3. As far as what type of inertial damping they have to prevent, cellular collapse, I don't know. But from what I was told, nothing that flies can outrun an Aurora. Some reports that it could basically cover the horizon of the desert in less than 2 seconds, which is rapid. I don't know whether they meant that G-loading was equivalent, or they meant that it could just out-race it. If it's top end, the Sprint ABM missile's top end was 17,000 miles per hour. I should mention that a scramjet, for those of you who don't know what a scramjet is a supersonic combustion ramjet. Because when you reach high Mach number, well, over Mach 4, the turbulence is so great that the air entering the nacelle becomes so disturbed that you can't get effective combustion. They found a way to get the air slowed down and get it more of a laminar flow developed, and they can inject, the combustor will work, otherwise it won't detonate. And the engines you won't get power out of them. Yes?
This was about a week ago, and they were talking about the G-forces and they developed a new suit that pilots and stuff wear, and that it was equivalent to 12 G-forces. And I thought, gee, why do they need that? We don't go, we don't go any place that would create like a 12 G.
The question now was about the new suits to maintain against high G-forces. Those are transient forces. To maintain high G loads over 7, or usually over 9, you induce gravity-induced loss of consciousness, and you black out, you get tunnel vision, and you're out of it. Obviously, 12 Gs might apply to something like the Aurora, but I don't assume it's from a dead start. You accelerate at 60 or 90 Gs. I don't. But what's interesting, there's an interesting corollary here. I'm working with a friend of mine who's an ex-fighter pilot, and we're putting a script together, and having known a lot of aviators, being one myself, I discovered that most fighter pilots who endure high G loading during their training and flying, when they have children, they almost 80% of the time have women, have girls. And they found that high G loading destroys the Y chromosomes in the sperm, and they only produce women children. It's like real strange. They found something else even stranger. And this is going to sound totally off the wall. And I just learned this the other day because it came up as a joke. You know in all the films you see about aviators, they're always barbecuing? Have you ever noticed, like in films about, there's something about flying, they become obsessed with barbecuing. And this is not a joke. They don't know why. I mean, I like to barbecue, but I mean, like, no, they have to barbecue. It's like everything. I mean, their brains are getting fried when they're in the vehicle. Because we're writing this script about the Aurora, and we do know there was experimental work done on a built-in catheter to the G suit that pumped a derivative speed, steroid derivative into the pilot's, the air, and the weapon system to increase reaction time and thought process. Because at the high Mach numbers, you would have to think real quick on your feet to avoid being killed. And the side effects were very, very disastrous. Did you have a question, Bill?
Three other related advanced technologies you haven't mentioned, but you might like to comment on, are the development of mind-reading computers back in the 1970s for aviation use. Well, Fuji is now developing one. Teleportation systems and the anti-proton beam weapons. Would you like to comment on?
His comments were, there were two high technology offshoots that were developed. One was mind-reading computers. Another one was, what was the second one? Teleportation or electroporting. The third one was anti-proton beams. The first one, there was a guy named Dr. Victor French at UCLA who I knew. He was part of a research program to interface a computer with the brain, not just to record crude EEGs, but to actually read thought. I mean, actually read what you're thinking and translate that into usable information, whether it's for weapons delivery or avionics technology or whatever. And it got pretty far developed, but it didn't get to where they could read your minds. They could differentiate up from down, left from right, forwards from backwards, male from female, like from dislike. The problem was they couldn't, let's say you're flying at Mach 3 in a low-level delivery of some ordnance, and suddenly something reminds you of your ex-wife, you know, or a bad day at work, and you go into a flat spin and you're dead. Or instead of firing your weapons, your engines flame out because you got real depressed. You see what I'm saying? That was the problem. And as funny as it sounds, it's very real. I do know that they've made very good progress regarding this, what they call artificial intelligence research with computers in the human brain, but it isn't sufficiently developed where they could utilize it. They have eye-slaved and head-slaved systems to the Apache and Comanche helicopters, but this is still a little bit different. The other thing was teleportation. There was an article I published in UFO magazine back in I think it was 91, and it was a technology called electroporting. And you know, Startrek, just disassemble matter, transmit it. To make a long story short, because we're running out of time, is AT&T, you're familiar with AT&T, in New Jersey, did some research with some large defense contractors, starting in the late 60s, and they found a way to take matter, break it down into its subatomic elemental components, transmit it through waves in the air, and reassemble it like the fly, like Star Trek. They could do it with inorganic and organic compounds, but nothing living would go through the system. An old friend of mine was at a demonstration, blew him away. He's at TRW, high-ranking engineer there. They were at China Lake Weapons Facility, 1979. And they sat down and watched two big booths and antenna arrays. They took a bowl of goldfish and transported it from one booth to another. And they lived. And everyone sat there totally just flabbergasted. And there was an environmental impact study done on this technology, and it said that if it was implemented, meaning commercialized, it would throw more than half the workforce of the country out of work. I'm going, well, we already have that. What else is new? But the idea, what is it? Replace transportation as we know it. Cars, boats, trains, planes. Why ship anything? Just zap it where you want to go. There were problems with it, which are much too detailed to get into now. But this brought up a specter of something else. If you could take matter, turn it into subatomic elemental components, transport it, and reassemble it, could you not reproduce something ad infinitum? Let's say you wanted to take this watch, doesn't work properly, I'm wearing, and you wanted to make a dozen copies of it. Well, if all matter is made of the same material, meaning atoms are made of protons, electrons, neutrons, which then are made of quarks and fractional charge carriers. If you get enough of those together in the right combination, you can build anything you want. Sort of like matter replicators in Star Trek, theoretically possible. Well then, you could make diamonds, you could make gold, you could make silver, stainless steel, plastic, aluminum, ad infinitum. All made of the same material, subatomic material. We won't live to see it, but it does exist. And the last thing Bill mentioned was the most exotic, all the stuff you read about in the Aviation Week and Defense Electronics and beam weapons is interesting, but the most lethal technology developed was called anti-proton beam weapons. And what's unique about this is you don't have to, the idea is having a platform up here in space, and you have a missile launched, an ICBM in boost phase, or mid-course, the busing phase. And the whole idea was, you know, with high-energy lasers and particle beams, you've got to fire down, hit the missiles. You have to acquire the target, track the target, then you have to target it. I mean, actually fire and hit it, and know you've hit it to retarget. This, no, you don't have to do this. You fire, you pulse your weapon into the window in space through which the MIRVs or the busing phase or the boost vehicle is to fly. You build up a high density of antiprotons, which, when coming in contact with normal matter, annihilate that matter. When the vehicles fly through that window, which is densely charged with antiprotons, the vehicle's disintegrated, totally. I mean, you can't ablate antiprotons. It's not like a laser. You don't even have to hit the dumb target. Just fill up an energy region in space. When the vehicle comes through it, it's gone. Now, you could also fire this weapon, if it was powerful enough, down onto the ground. And it fans out, it sort of diffuses, and it could be hundreds of square miles. What would happen to buildings and people under the weapon? Bye. The technology exists. I'll give you an example. With high-energy lasers in the megawatt range, they could take blocks of titanium 8 inches thick, 12 inches wide, and cut a hole through them in less than a millisecond. That's lasers. This has millions of times more energy. These lasers are about 1% to 2% efficient. An anti-proton beam is closer to 90% efficient. Nothing would stand up to it. This stuff exists. We'll never see it happening, but if you get Aviation Week, if you could subscribe to it, you see some impressive stuff. So this is where we're heading. We won't see fuel propulsion in our lifetime. We won't see warp drive in our lifetime. We'll see auroras and more scramjets in our lifetime. And the biggest upset was just the other week, 2 weeks ago, NASA dropped the National Aerospace Plane, which was the single-stage to orbit vehicle to replace the shuttle. We ran out of money. There's no more money, so the NASA is goodbye, and they're back to expendable launch vehicles again. Okay, and we're back to square one. And if you brought NASA a fully functional fuel propulsion vehicle to launch this Freedom Space Station in orbit for pennies, they'd say, we don't want it. Why? Well, we can't afford it. If you gave it to them, they wouldn't use it. They'd hold it back, give it to the Department of Defense for a weapon. Yes?
Do you believe the Montauk project was there in the area of
What?
Montauk? Was there Long Island?
Which one are you, be specific?
Montauk, Long Island, New Jersey project.
No, I don't have enough information.
Mind control, electronics, and everything.
I don't have enough information to render decisions. I don't know. I do know that about some of these things, unless there's ways to back them up with, documentation or affidavits or people who work. The only reason I know the teleportation technology is real, I met by accident a number of the engineers who were working on the project, who had worked on it. So to me, it was basically secondhand information.
Let's put it to the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Philadelphia experiment, and I just don't know how far it went. Again, information's too vague to me. All I do know is that our worst enemy we have to protect ourselves from is not the Soviets or the Russians, is not the Arabs, is not some crazy terrorist. It's us. We have to protect ourselves against us. We're the worst enemy, meaning people in general, whoever we are. And if we can't use it against somebody else, we use it against ourselves. So it's, but I don't believe we have effective mind control because we're here, aren't we? If it was that effective, we wouldn't be here. But most people are dead into this stuff anyway, so it's cocktail hour discussion. So but again, it's intriguing. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Yes?
The LA Times on Friday had an article on the gravitational energy the universe, said that they can only explain like one-tenth of 1% of what's there, by the mass of all the stars in the universe. Any thoughts on some of those other
Your question is whether the universe open or close, whether we're going to collapse back into a big globe of energy, or we're going to keep expanding? Is that what you're asking?
Talking about dark matter.
Oh, dark matter. Well, they think that there's sufficient dark matter which we can't be viewed through optical telescopes to compensate for the expansion. If that's correct, eventually the universe would collapse back into a huge ball and explode again. But we don't have to worry about it. It'll be billions of years from now. I mean, it's like, who cares? I mean, it's intriguing, but the whole thing's fascinating. But we can't. It's sort of like think about this: the Big Bang. The universe blew out into whatever. If there was something for the universe to blow out into, something pre-existed before the universe. Because how could it blow out into what wasn't there? Kind of like, makes you think, what's going on? So the whole thing is like really strange. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'd like to thank you. You've been a very attentive audience.